Got it. We are live once again, with hopefully no technical issues like we had yesterday. Joining me today is a fellow Canadian, Kavita Singh, who's all the way from Vancouver, but a resident of London for 2 decades now. And by day is a management consultant with one of the big fours, but also as an artist and a musician. And I'm really excited to have you on and talk to the community today, Kavita. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure, and thank you for inviting me.
Can you, just introduce yourself to the community? Tell everybody who you are and what you do. And while you're doing that, I just do a few technical things and check the links are okay.
So, hi everyone. Nice to virtually meet you. I'm Kavita Singh. So, I have a very interesting path. I would say I'm a 360 creative. So, by day, I'm a strategist for one of the big four. And I really just fell into that because I was a creative. But my main passion and my main reason for coming to London from Vancouver 20 years ago is to be a singer-songwriter. And I managed to get myself a record deal. I still don't know how I did that from Vancouver to here back in the late 90s. And that set me off on this journey that I guess I'm still on.
Thanks for that. I too, I came over to the UK, I think a little bit earlier than you. I think we were talking about it the other day. I came over the same year that Bryan Adams came over.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
what
1989. 1989.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Kavita, we spoke, and also reading your bio and learning more about what you do and the hurdles and the challenges you've seen in life. I'm really grateful that you could come in here and talk to people really about your experiences, because I think that there's no better way to chat to people than about experiences and seeing, how you've gotten to where you are today. Like I can just imagine you coming over here, and like you said, and you're 1,300 pounds in your pocket and literally couch surfing, and just going, I'm in the big city, like Vancouver to London is a long way.
It still is, yeah.
Yeah, and the courage to do something like that. What was it like? First of all, what was it like in Vancouver? Where were you feeling the itch and the kind of the want to move somewhere, to be adventurous, to be courageous, to try and to get yourself out of the zone of the home environment, to take the risk to move to this big bad city? And bad, I don't mean bad. I mean,
no, wow. I know what you're saying. It can be bad, like every city can be, but but thank you, Nick, for that, because I don't get asked this very often. People look at Vancouver, as you know, being a fellow Canadian, and they think we've lost the plot, and somehow, what are we doing here, right? Nobody understands that everywhere is good and everywhere has its challenges. And I guess we're of a similar generation, born in the 70s, where, it was tough to be an individual in Vancouver at the time. I have mixed origins. I'm born in there. My parents are Fijian, Indian, came over in the 60s. They're also mixed heritage, and trying to really just be a creative person at the time as a teenager. In Vancouver. And again, it's really interesting that you say it, because the first demo I sent out was to Penta Records, and that's Bruce Allen's company, which is Bryan Adams' manager. So it feels like Bryan Adams is in the air,
Yeah.
And I was about 16, and that was the late 80s. And, I either had the choice of being the rock chick or actually doing the kind of music that I wanted to do. And I really wanted to explore. I had some interest as that kind of brown Alana Miles business. I mean, I was 30 years ahead of the game, right? But then I thought, well, at 16, as you are, naive and not understanding the industry, I'm like, oh, I can come back to this later. And I wanted to do more R&B, jazz, and I was just discovering house. And I know in Vancouver, that was very colloquial. It was a few clubs in town, a few sort of, at that time, they still had vinyl. So, kind of saving up for the vinyl, things like Inner City that were, in hindsight, they were sort of the second wave of when disco became house music, right? So I guess a couple of years and I graduated, was going through uni, went to UBC first, so went to SFU. And then it came across a couple of musicians that were working out of here. And at the time, it was not easier, but there was much more of an open-minded view for someone that looked and sounded like me, not to pigeonhole me in a particular area. And one of the things I will say, so I'll be totally transparent with you and this community, because I do think we need to talk in transparent terms and sometimes say things are a little bit uncomfortable. And that was a different time, but still, I was known as the East Indian girl with the good voice, in Vancouver. And so I did not want to be pigeonholed, right? I did not want to be put in a way that just because of what I look like or where, my background was originally, I did not want to do world music or whatever, right? I was a young girl and I wanted to explore, but it felt like Vancouver couldn't give me a chance, any slots I would be getting, it was under the banner of world music, which is perfect. Okay, there's lots of artists and musicians that do amazing stuff, but that wasn't me. And so that really got me on. I think I had enough. There was a few things with BMG in Canada, had a few things that were put out that did reasonably well, but still, again, there was that ceiling, right? And I don't think it was malicious, but it was this lack of understanding that identity for everyone is very complex. And I think a lot of the issues that people with mental health come through are also around, I find I suffered a lot of mental health issues growing up because I wasn't allowed to express myself, right? Now, that was a time where there was a lot of racism, there was a lot of things that you couldn't get access to, right? Nothing, I'm not saying it's perfect now, but thankfully it's a very, very different world in that capacity at the moment. So that's what led me to London, right? And maybe it was a little naive because if I thought it was bad then, coming to London, it was like coming into the fire, right? So in hindsight, but when you're in your early 20s, you know what it's like. You came here as well, right? And it was maybe in hindsight, I was trying to escape, trying to escape being limited creatively by staying at home. So, that's how I ended up here.
Yeah. You mentioned the word identity, and it's something as it's funny as you're speaking, I'm trying to, I'm thinking of the similarities with my story and just really growing up. And, I grew up in Saskatoon, and sport was my life, really. I just was always, but I still had this feeling like I never fit in. And I just always felt like I had friends, but I wasn't super popular, or like I looked like I fit into the jock clique. But so on the outside you'd say, oh, you led a typical high school life, but inside of me it was just this, I just don't belong here. And at 18 it was no problem for me to pick up, I didn't even say goodbye to anybody.
Oh wow.
It was just literally like a hockey bag, like stuff, and then on the plane, and moving here and staying with uncles and aunties and everything. So it was just this thing of just not feeling like I fit in. And it's something that has been a continuing factor through my life, up until really recently, where I found, community in a recovery community, and I felt connection there. But look at my little ones just popped into the room.
Hey.
Exactly. I'm working, buddy. What's that, bud? I don't know where his phone is. You're gonna have to ask him. And then there's my other one bopping in, trying to find phones. Guys, I'm working.
That's okay. So, we're keeping it real. Yeah. We're keeping it real, Nick.
Yeah. See you guys later. Last time I was looking after Zach on a half term, and he came in and actually crawled. He didn't know I was working, and he crawled all over me. And so thank you for understanding.
Yeah, that's all good. That's all good.
But it's this idea of, and I liken it to that there was some things happened to me in younger life, where my household wasn't stable, and I didn't have a lot of No, I did. I always felt like an outsider looking in, even back in memories of 5 years old, looking into playgrounds where everyone was playing and wanting to kind of go join in, but actually not, just feeling safer on the other side of the fence.
Right. Yeah.
Feeling safer watching everybody play and get involved. And I think it was just because my household was quite scary at times. So inside of me was this fear of not being accepted or liked or anything. And so it was easy for me just to move and to keep moving. And it seemed to be a pattern in my life for years and years, for decades, was to never really kind of commit and grow roots, but always just to come and skip off,
I so relate to that.
This word with identity. I never really knew a purpose that I was meant to fulfill on this planet, and that's not giving me much of an identity.
That's such a deep topic that you've touched with, right? Like, because I don't think it's just a generational thing of, people of our age group, but I think we pick up when we don't feel connection and synergy with our loved ones, right? So I understand you sort of being in your family and not feeling like that was your space, because for me, family, it was a typical, my particular family story was, even though my nuclear family, my mom and dad were brilliant and very loving and supportive, there was an extended family that was really emotionally burdensome. Yeah, because it was that, first generation. My parents were the bright ones that got to Canada, made careers. They were the people that were supposed to bring everybody with them. And I'm sure it continues on to today. So there was a lot of emotional labor, a lot of things. We were always supposed to be doing something for someone, some uncle, some aunts, whatever, because we, for some, for my parents' sins, were people that were bright enough to figure out how to be self-made, right? And so that caused a lot of issues. So I can understand it was hard to articulate, like you say, we can think about it now as adults saying, actually, I felt like I was an adult before I actually had time to grow up. And for me, it was like, probably you had something similar as well, not the same issues, but, you just don't want to burden anyone, because you don't really know what you're feeling, but you're not actually feeling a part of where you are. And that was the same for me.
Yeah. And then I can imagine you came over here too, and people, like, I got judged quite a lot for my accent, as a Canadian coming here. I can imagine you.
Imagine I have the accent and then I look like I'm from wherever, right?
Yeah. I can't even imagine. Yeah,
it was ridiculous here, like 20 years ago, where people would come up to me and they go, but Canadians are supposed to be white, aren't they? Like, really, that level of disrespect. Yeah. On the bus stop, right, at Golders Green, right? And I'm looking at them. I said, lady, she was a lot older, so I wasn't gonna sort of go there. But I said, have you looked at our Indigenous people? And that shut her up. So I became the queen of one-liners as a kid.
Right.
Just like, have you looked at our Indigenous people?
Yeah.
Because we're all settlers. It doesn't matter if you're not First Nations. And now what's going on in Canada right now. It's a totally different understanding, and the complexity and the things that we have to unpack right now, right? So that's a really long conversation, and that gets into the realm of where we are as Canadians and why we feel the way that we do. But I guess for the larger audience here, I guess that feeling of sort of going from Canada, feeling like, I'm being limited here because of people are just a little, not narrow-minded, but a little provincial, right? To coming here and having to deal with some really heavy stuff. People are making all these assumptions about me. Like, I'd never heard the word Asian, until I got here. And people used to ask me 20 years ago if I was Asian. And to me, Asian was a continent, right?
Yeah.
And always asking that question, but where are you originally from? Now, you wouldn't ask a Scottish Canadian that question, would you? You wouldn't ask, you probably didn't get asked that question. And that would always wind me up. I'm like, like East Vancouver.
Yeah.
East Vancouver, right? And I think that was quite intense back in the day. I think now with understanding, and hopefully people like you and myself and the other folks that have been brave and just come out and created identities for themselves, it's changing. But it's kind of like the lesson, the lesson. Hello, buddy.
Oh,
You got a fan.
yeah, he wants my phone.
He'll be finished soon, buddy.
He knows it's my face ID. Okay, let me just, yeah. Okay, let me just put this in because it's not working. It's not working, but hold on. Let me just do this. There you go. Okay. When did you know that you had the voice? When did that come out?
First gig when I was 5. I guess I don't even know if it was a gig. It was at Langara College in Vancouver. My mom was a singer from Fiji, so she had her. She actually worked for BBC World in Fiji. So it was tiny, one little room, and nothing like BBC here in White City and all of that. And so it was something for me to do, and I started singing, and then I sort of sang kid stuff and show tunes. And then I started to write when I was a teenager, and I got accepted into this sort of this school called Point Grey Mini, in Vancouver, which is, I guess it's for kids that have a talent or show potential for something. And I had a chance to nurture my writing because, as long as you had a certain grade point average, you could go out and pursue your passion. And so, I got a little bit of a head start. That's where I sort of started recording locally.
Buddy.
Started recording locally, and that's where it started.
Sorry.
Okay. We'll just anticipate him coming in and out and being like a live performance, okay?
I'm always someone I hear somebody think or speak of when they discover the talent like singing or being able to hear music, or draw, or do something like that. I get a little not jealous, but I'm like, why can't I hear music that way? Why can't I see like music on a sheet, and understand what they're hearing and how it kind of flows and stuff. So I'm always very much in awe of people who've got a singing talent because I'm so talentless.
Oh no, dude, no, you're not. I wanted to be the female Guy Lafleur. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so you can do that, and I can't. My skating has been average for most of my life. Okay. And so I would love to be able to play hockey half as good as probably, the average hockey player. But I think we all have something, right? I know it's funny.
Sure,
people go, what?
I was just a bit of a knuckle dragger on ice. That's all. I don't consider that I was born with any gifts or anything like music. But what about the Fijian part of it, the culture, that music, was that how much has that influenced you? And because the house music is quite a step, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess because I was, the beauty of, I don't want to sound like an ad for Canadian tourism, but I think the beauty of growing up and being, born and raised in Vancouver at the time was you didn't have to pick anything. It was like I lived in a largely Italian neighborhood, close to this place called Commercial Drive, which used to be Little Italy at the time. Now it's kind of moved on a little bit. And there was everyone, so, and we lived as a proper community. Everyone went in and out of each other's houses. So the Fijian part was it was because I guess Fiji is a really interesting place. It's a melting pot anyway, because it was an island that was basically not habited. But the British in the 1800s brought people in because it was colonized that way. So there's a bit of that Fijian culture I've got. The music is very, the typical South Pacific, but then also my parents are an Indian mix. So there's a bit of that. There's also a bit of, the Hawaiian, the kind of vibe. And I'm going back in December for the first time in a long time, and it's nice to go to a place where everyone kind of, because of all it's a melting pot, everyone kind of looks like you, and it's lovely, and it's got a really laid back feel. But remember, Nick, it's only 1 million people. You can create paradise with 1 million people, right? I mean, they've got social problems, don't get me wrong, but I guess growing up, it was a part of me. And I think, but I didn't have to, this is the thing we were talking earlier. I don't think that people have to choose a clear identity. Like for me, I say I'm Canadian because that's where I'm from. It doesn't mean that I negate my roots or whatever, but I'm not defined by them, Just like I've spent 20 years in London. I'm a Canadian Londoner like you, right? Like 22 years here, you've been here longer. I just think people should be free to define themselves, right?
Yeah.
Okay, there's limits, right? Like when we talk about privilege, that's another realm, right? Where you talk about cultural appropriation and that's not what we're saying. I'm like, that's a totally different conversation. But in a situation like ours where, you're in a country where there is no real defined identity, right? It is just liberal and welcoming. I think people define themselves the way they feel.
Yeah. It's funny because like I don't actually really identify as Canadian anymore. I really just feel like I live in Soho and I just feel like a Soho guy. Like,
well, and I love Soho, eh? Like I'm a member of the union there. So
right.
So I get it.
Yeah, I like the union. It's such a cool place. And I think even when I came to London in the 1997, I think I moved here permanently from the Isle of Wight. And yeah, I moved to Chiswick and I got an office on Darby Street next to Black Market Records.
Yeah.
So we were talking about vinyl, but so I always, since the time that you moved here, I suppose I felt part of Soho, and it's always felt like part of my identity. And funny enough, like I think it's because it's when I look further back at the history of Soho, I feel like maybe I'm an incarnation of somebody that used to hang out here a long time ago. So I don't know.
I lived at Cafe Italia when I first got here, right?
Yeah.
And I really like Soho. I guess for me as a singer-songwriter, I'm in Northwest London now. I've been here. I lived in West Hampstead for a while and then moved over here. I guess I like just the fact that it's so nondescript out here, that I just need that space. And when I want the atmosphere, just take the Northern Line down or take my old beater down the, A41 and I'm there, right? So even, after 6:30 now because of, Mr. Congestion charge there. But it's really interesting that you say that. I can't say, that's why I call myself a Canadian Londoner, right? Because I also feel London is also part of my blood. And it also gave me the opportunity. And it gave me some big opportunities, right? Like my biggest track is called Every Day. It was on Defected Records, and I don't still know how I got on there because it was licensed by a small label, Flipside Records, that I was on for years. And again, really weird synergy. Canadian woman from Montreal, right? I was introduced to her by a producer from Montreal, and she was in Laverick Grove, and we were the two women in deep sort of jazzy house music. So basically live instruments, vocals, it wasn't EDM, it was much more sort of like a progressive kind of disco vibe. And we did really well, from like 2000 to say 2013 or so. She was here. And then I think, the industry changed with streaming and running a label. And you're with a few women in the city, right? Like having distribution with 4AD what was a big thing, for two women from Canada, right? And I was the main artist, right? So it was a great time, So Soho, Laverick Grove, all of those places. I started working with some Bugs in the Attic as well. They're quite known as pioneers of breakbeat music, right? So a lot of these guys like Wiley, Dizzy Rascal, they were mentored by Bugs in the Attic and a few other guys. So, you know, I don't want to go on to name drop, but I mean, that's kind of my milieu, right?
Yeah.
But then I found that it was always good to have not a side hustle, but a parallel career. I never stopped having a parallel career. First as sort of a journalist, you know, and then moving into the city, doing media, the creative director thing, because I always kind of didn't trust the music industry, right? And I probably have never regretted that, because when I talk to people my age that 20 years ago had a top 10 hit and they were forced to drive an Uber in the pandemic, it breaks my heart, right? That such talented people, there's all this thing about not having a backup plan. I don't believe all this new age crap, you know, that just forget everything and just go for your dreams. It's like, well, for some people that might work.
Yeah.
But for some people, it's always good to take a more balanced approach. And again, it comes back to your mental composition, right? If you're somebody can handle that level of uncertainty, and some people can't. So there isn't kind of this thing. So I always took this dual track approach. And
I think it's extremely wise. I think, especially because, you know, like, I suppose you started before the age of social media, you know, and I think that, and likewise, my kind of day on TV was before social media. And I think that there's so many different pressures of the glamorous life that being on TV or being a musician or being a comedian, you know, like this kind of idea of fame that today's world has on it now is so, it's so bright, and people are so clouded by it, and they think because of social media that they can get some kind of fame, and that's it. But really, you know, what is that? What is having followers on a social media platform? You know,
I mean, I can be, you know, I can be an old codger in that, and I say, because, you know, I still do a lot of traveling for both, right? I still do lots of music for, you know, different projects. So I get to travel. I travel a lot for work, for the corporate gig. And you see a lot of these the thing that worries me about influencers is they don't tell the truth to their young followers, right? You have kids, so you know, I have nieces and nephews. What really worries me is when you see those influencers in Dubai, especially the women, and they're not getting stuff for free, they're actually doubling as escorts. That's not the story that they will tell their followers. They will tell their followers this really naive thing that they're getting all these products and a free weekend in Dubai on a yacht for nothing but being an influencer. So, I mean, I think that's a really important point. But I mean, I guess, how do we stop the train? And how do we kind of take the younger generation to kind of sort of try and get some balance around it? I think we used to have something called media education, right? Maybe we need something called we need social media education, right, for kids.
Oh, I think it's coming. I think it's coming because I think the effects of it are still yet to be seen because it's still so new. But I think that, you know, even with my guys, you know, for me to say, hey, I'm going to be doing something, they need a phone, they need an iPad, you know, and as someone who's looking after them, you're kind of okay, just sit on your iPad while I'm working, and it's so easy. So I think it's this kind of, we're all just trying to figure it out. But I think the important thing that we talk about is that people like yourself are born with talents. They're born with music in their veins, and it's the kind of the thing of like, what are we trying to be? Are we trying to be the next Alicia Keys, or are we trying to have fun and just enjoy the ride and explore where it can bring us? And I think that that's the problem with social media and media itself. It's like, if you're not up here with the 0.0001%,
so
you know.
Wrong. Which is so wrong. That's a really important point, Nick, that, you know, everybody's journey and make no mistakes. I think the kids today have to understand the reality of big stars like Alicia Keys. They're child prodigies, right? Their parents put them in, New York elite programs by the time they were 5 years old. Beyonce is the same, you know, she was doing this when she was 2 or 3. It took 30 years to become Alicia Keys. It took 30 years to become Beyonce. They don't all of a sudden get discovered, right? Like on a smaller level, for me, there's this track I put out there called Tango, and it got 100,000 streams. That took 20 years. Yeah. 100,000 streams is great. And maybe today's artists, because obviously they're of today's generation, get that in a week, right? Or a day. That's great. But there's always a cumulative effect. And this is kind of what we need to be teaching the young kids, right? Like your kids' age and onward, that there's still nothing happens instantaneously. There's always something in the background that is kind of set something or someone up for success, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So you came here in the late 90s, and
Yeah.
and all I remember about the late 90s is that's when I discovered hedonism.
Yeah, well, I think you weren't the only one, right?
So I think I mentioned to you over the phone, I had about 18 months, a year and a half, where it was fun, hanging out in the nightclubs here, and the Groove Armadas and the Fat Boy Slims, and, like music was cool, clubbing was cool. Party favors were part of it all, and everyone was it was just the late 90s. What was your experience with that when you got here? Like, I can
same as yours. The same as yours. I at one point was managed by a guy called Ron Tom that discovered the All Saints and the Sugar Babes. So you can imagine to all the parties that I went to, right?
Yeah.
And I guess I made the big change. I mean, being part of that world, going to parties where there was the Spice Girls, and
I bet we've been to some of the same parties.
Yeah, we've been to the same parties.
I bet you, yeah. Because I remember when the All Saints came out, and
like Sketch. You remember Sketch back in the day? Yeah, there you go. I was there quite a bit. So
I love Sketch.
Yeah. Oh my God.
That's funny. No, it was fun, but it wasn't the like I say. I mean, I think that was the thing. It was just a way to kind of get out of that feeling of fear. For me, those parties and those substances were a balancer. Whereas for a lot of people, it was enjoyment. For a small time, it was enjoyment for me, but then all of a sudden became this necessity for me because what I discovered is that they took a lot of the fear away of not fitting in. And and that was the thing, is I actually was told, one of the largest sports broadcasters in the world at the time, that I was really good at my job, but I didn't fit in because of the way I talk. Yeah. So I'm already, and I can't even, I know what it did to me. I can't even imagine what it does to, a woman in the music industry when you're, when you're told certain things, and the amount of rejection, I suppose, that you have to deal with.
Yeah, it was intense. I mean, I walked away from several big record deals here, right? And I ended up parting ways with Ron Tom because I wanted to pursue something that felt right for me. And he was a big time, think about it. The All Saints, Sugar Babes, you name it. This man was one of the top managers at the time in England, right? Or in the music industry. And I wanted to go my own route. And he said that would just be very niche. And I said, well, everything niche becomes mainstream. So it depends on how you want to do that, right? The rejection was, to be honest, thank you for bringing that up. It was relentless, right? The fact that I am just now beginning to realize that actually I'm not those things. And so as a woman in the industry, right, there's always these layers. You're never thin enough. You're never good looking enough. You're never young enough, even if you're in your early 20s, right? So the great thing is about getting older is you don't care anymore because that ceiling is gone, right? And when it comes to this, being a woman of color, it's even more profound. You got to fit into a box. They tell me it's changing now, but I'm dealing with some labels and some production companies right now, and it's still it's not maybe as bad as it used to be when we were hanging out in places like this, but there's still lots of we have two of those, that's okay, we've done our women of color bit. That still happens, and everybody will put out the statements of saying we are inclusive of everyone and blah blah blah, but it's just that at the moment, right? So any woman in particular getting into the music industry, particularly women of color, I would say just beware and do your thing and strap in. It's a long ride. And you have to deal with the fact that people are going to project their bullshit onto you, right? And there was some really dark moments. Yeah, there was some really, really dark moments I had, because music didn't have its Me Too movement then, and it still hasn't. The level of sexual harassment. If I had a daughter, that's the way I'm going to say it diplomatically, is I would not want them to go into the music industry, even today. Like even the stories that I hear just last week, you know, of someone on a project that were interested in working with me on. They've got a younger niece that just the way that she's being objectified is making him as her uncle, and he's a producer in the industry, really uncomfortable. This is a 23-year-old woman, right? Where like 50-year-old producers are kind of like trying to slide into her DMs. It's just, I mean, people tell you it's different, but it's not. You know, I mean, I'm still in the industry. I'm just more selective now, you know, like I work on stuff and I don't necessarily have to plaster it that it's me that's doing it. So, yeah, I mean, but you know what? I think the thing for us, for the next generation, is to just say it's a great industry. That's why we all try and create, a presence there. But you have to know what you're getting into. Yeah. And I think, and the role of parents, managers, and sort of mentors is really important in this. You know, I was really lucky that I found a smaller label, Flipside, that kind of helped me produce my catalog of music. But it was women-led. It was a really comfortable environment. There was nothing I could do anything. I came up with a song, they recorded it. You know, so it was very small. But I'm just now. But everything kind of gets to where it needs to go. I'm finding 20 years later, things are getting picked up, right, on TV programs, or I'm hitting 100,000 streams. I don't know how. But, you know, it's being rediscovered. I wound up on TikTok with one of my tunes. I'm like, how did this happen? Right. And so people are like, yeah, you just had to wait 20 years for you to kind of, and I'm like, so I
started TikTok.
Yeah. It's hilarious, right? There's this cute young kid like singing one of my songs, Superficial. And I'm sitting there going, oh, okay. So it is, you'll get there. I guess the advice I would give for anyone that wants to not go that, you know, I want to be a big star. I want to have my own career in music. Just keep finding your way, because there's always a way, right?
I think that's it. It's the expectations, right? Don't shoot to be the Beyoncés and stuff, because I think that they're industry created, as you mentioned, industry and parent created, and
they're not an accident at all.
No. All planned. Same thing. I even think same thing with Kardashians. Kardashians were not an accident.
Oh yeah. I mean, think about it.
These are
was what's his face?
Yeah,
right?
The lawyer.
The lawyer of OJ, right?
OJ. But I think that is the thing. Is like these there's huge corporations where there's a boardroom of normally white men, you know, that are sitting there in their hands selecting these
people.
These people to make the next stars, to sell products at the end of the day. And I think that if you have a real true passion, whether it's for dance or for music or for anything where, like you say, the Me Too movement may not have happened yet, like it's happened in Hollywood, but it's still out there. There are still predators out there in those industries. To just be careful. If your parents and you're listening to this and your child is talented and amazing, guide them to safe spaces, because there are beautiful safe spaces. And I know the Elephant Castle community have a ton of them, a lot of dance coaches and singing coaches that are really amazing people. So I think that just, and the expectations are enjoy it. You know, and that's what I tell my guys.
That's why we're doing it, right? That's why we're doing it.
Just enjoy it. And that's why I tell my guys about ice hockey and stuff, is like, you got very little chance of making the NHL. I don't say that, but because I think it's a 0.014 chance of making it into the NHL for a young hockey player. You got a better chance of winning the lottery 3 times over. You know, so use the sport like I did. You know, I used the sport to get me into certain, you know, to get a university degree and to get me into another another line of work like TV broadcasting, which I'm very, very fortunate to have been in. But sport and being part, and I'm sure it's the same for you, as you're part of a community, right?
Yeah.
And you know, so be careful. But you know, we're running out of time. I want to get into your day job and how you kind of balance the two. Are they two interwoven kind of practices that you have, and how do you manage it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's probably lucky that I don't, not lucky. It probably, when everyone's like, you know, when I have my female friends that have kids, they go, how do you manage it? I said, well, because I don't have kids. So that's one thing, right? I think I'm still able to be musically active and have a presence because I guess music, and I know it sounds cheesy, music is my baby, right? Because I don't have the kids, and partner's very self-sufficient. So it's not really like that gives me more time. And I guess the day job is I've kind of made it my own, you know, and it wasn't always this, right? So I'm only one in EMEA, right? So a lot of I think I kind of struggled along in the consultancy route where people looking at me going, she's this singer, creative consultant. What is she doing here? And it was always like, you had to use my creativity to show what I could actually bring to the business world. And it took a long time, but I guess now we're at a place where with people really reassessing, you know, what is it that we're trying to achieve, right? What does late stage capitalism look like? Can it be much more sustainable? Can it be less oppressive? Can it be less about men in suits and all of those things, right? That we know that the city is. And I guess about 2 years ago, in the big four, that one of the big four that I am in, this job came up as a sort of creative market strategist, right? So essentially my job is to work with some very big companies and our account leads to find out the transformation that the company wants to create. And luckily for me, a lot of them want to do sustainability. They really want to understand how to make sustainability stick, for lack of a better word, in their business models, in their day-to-day culture. So when you talk about ESG, it's not just environmental, right? There's the social aspect, and the governance is around so many different things, not just the environment regulation. And that is really rewarding for me, right? Because I bring in everything. I bring in my writing, I bring in my creativity. We have different types of collaborations with clients. I mean, you do a lot of corporate work as well. And I know that you probably use different methods to keep people motivated and enthusiastic, right? So I'm just able to use a lot of my creativity, you know, like I'll take from different sectors, I'll take from my own well of experience, I'll bring in people I know. So whatever client that we're working with really gets a sense of really freeing themselves from what they think they can and can't do. So, you know, last time I checked, this job is still hanging around, so I'm still employable, but it's taken a long time, Nick. You know, I can't say it's been an easy marriage between the city and my music, but I just kept trucking along, you know.
It's beautiful. That's all we can do. Keep on trucking, you know, keep showing up. I'm interested, like if you're coming out of COVID now, people are back into, you know, bars and restaurants and small venues. Are you doing any live performances at all, or is it something you're interested in?
You know, I'm hoping to, but I was a member of the hospital club and it closed down, and I had a residency there for years. So truth be told, I'm a little lost because I had my residency there. I would have invited people, you know, to come there if that's still open. I'm working on it. You know, I think we're slowly, some of my colleagues in the music business starting up their residencies again. I'll definitely let you know, but I think it probably won't be till the later part of this year or next year.
Keep me posted. I'd love to be able to come and listen. But also, like, I mean, I'd love to, you know, my client, I want to make sure that she listens to this, you know, the Elephant and Castle, because I know that they might even be interested in having you down and doing some stuff down there, because the art, performing, dancing is a big part of entertaining the community. So I think that would be pretty cool too.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, well, we've run out of time.
Well,
It
it's been
just
great.
goes, it just flies by. Thank you so much for joining us. If people need want to get in touch with you, do you want me to just put your artist management in the face? Yeah,
Yeah, that's perfect.
that's what I'll do. Thank you so much for joining
Thanks
us.
so much, Nick.
Please stay in touch, and if you find yourself
Definitely.
in Soho, look me up and we'll go for coffee.
Yeah, definitely. We'll see you there.
Okay, thank you, and thank everybody for joining us.
Yeah,
I'll be
thanks a
back
lot, everyone. Yeah.
Thursday for some workshops, and next Tuesday for another Facebook Live. We'll see you all later. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye.